So first things first, Lias, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm all right. I'm better today than I have been this week. I had a bit of a cold. I was out in Algeria last weekend, filming a remake of the Verbs Bittersweet Symphony in the mountains there for one of the songs on this record about my brother's circumcision. You know, but it was colder there than I usually go to Algeria in the spring or the summer. I haven't been in the winter, you know, but this was like, okay, if we want to do this, we have to do it now, you know. And you know, the Ashcroft look he has in that video, it's kind of like, it's not exactly a winter look. It's a denim jacket, it's a leather jacket, it's a, you know, so I got a bit of a chill out there. It's not really a great place to have a chill, you know. It's just not geared up for winter. There's no duvets, there's no insulation.
Okay.
It's a hyper kind of masculine environment. It's harsh, you know? And then I dragged that over to Paris for the press days and it wasn't that pleasant, you know? But today...
You're on the up and up now.
Today was the first day I woke up and I was like, you know, when you're well again after being ill, and suddenly like music sounds sweet, you know, and you're kind of...
a little bit more energy.
You feel the energy and you're like ready to go at it again. And you know, it's the thing when you're sick, like psychologically the effect it has, you know, when you're a bit ill, like your problems are these insurmountable kind of crystallized kind of things, you know, but when you're kind of well again and you have a surplus, you can kind of just flow through things a little bit.
No, I agree. There's a mentality to being sick. Once you kind of feel like I'm sick, then everything becomes that, you know.
Yeah, everything becomes a bit much, you know. Right from the moment you get that first tingle, you know, that first hurt, it's kind of the worst bit, that, because there's still hope and you still haven't accepted it, you know. It's like, is this... Oh, it's not, is it? It's not. Oh, because there's always something in it. You've always got something you want to do, you know?
Sure.
If it's not work, it's pleasure, you know? You're always like, this is going to ruin whatever that is, you know? It's going to turn anything into tedium and effort, you know? But you hold on, you know? It's only once you start having like herbal drinks and stuff like that, when you have your first lemon and ginger, it's that the taste of that is like, now you're sick. You know.
But it's good that you're feeling better then. But you do raise an interesting point, and it's immediately a good step towards the album, because I think you mentioned Today You Become a Man, the song, which is about circumcision to some extent. But what is your, this is going to sound ridiculous maybe, but what is your relationship with Algeria and your bond? Because you've been... go ahead.
I mean, my relationship with Algeria is, I'm Algerian, you know, but I'm also not, you know. I'm like, I go back there and, you know, it's like, it's the old theocratic kind of system that we gave up on here however long ago is still just like unshifted, you know. So they have, like the family unit is still all powerful and all-encompassing, and that is how society kind of governs itself, you know. Family is everything. So, you know how families are kind of dissolved around Europe or around countries, and like my cousins in England, I don't really know my cousins in England, you know. And if I saw them, it would be lukewarm, I'm sure. But if you go back to Algeria, to the mountains, there's this small town called Michedella in a place called Bouira, right up in the mountains. You know, and half of the people in this town have got the second name Saudi, you know. They're all like, they're all related, you know, because they've all just been in that area for so long, you know. So, and they all treat you like you're the long lost brethren, you know, like there's no one, they all want to stop you, they all want to speak to you, they all want to kind of, so it's strange, you're in this completely alien environment, but then you're welcomed like you've been welcomed nowhere else ever, you know. So it almost kind of multiplies the weirdness and the otherness of it, you know. It makes a weird place even weirder.
But is that, I mean, I've talked with people about identity and not not necessarily feeling like they have a home, because as you mentioned, you don't feel, I suppose, completely Algerian because you never
No.
really lived there, but then you lived in different parts of the UK, but that never, I suppose,
Yeah.
felt like home as well. So, or maybe it did, I don't know. But
Yeah.
how have you kind of made peace with that?
I think when I was in the pandemic, I got to a point where I was like, okay, this is the way the world is now. Like, who do I want to like share this with? You know? And I ended up getting into a relationship with like my best friend, you know, of like 12 years. And it's just this one completely consistent kind of figure in my life, you know? And I was like always kind of chasing around the wrong kind of idea of what happiness might be or whatever, you know, something shiny and other, you know, like, and I think it was kind of always there, like that sense that maybe it's not like, it's not a place, you know what I mean? It's kind of a person, you know, home, I guess, you know, it's kind of in you to settle that score with yourself, that it's not going to be kind of like, it's not going to come from somewhere else, not for me anyway, you know, because I really didn't. Like, I wouldn't say that I was English, I wouldn't say that I was Scottish, I wouldn't say that I was Irish, I wouldn't say that I was Northern Irish, not with any real, and I wouldn't say that I was Algerian, you know, with any real self. I'm a Londoner now, I guess. I've been in London longer than anywhere else. I'm a kind of self-adopted Londoner, but I've kind of made a bit of a home in the last 3 years for the first time, you know, and I see what all the fuss was about, but then I do still miss like the kind of rogue ways, you know. I miss roguing it up a little bit, you know.
Is there, I don't know, this is just from the outside looking in to the band Fat White Family, but has there been a big shift in the past couple of years?
With the band?
Yeah.
No, things just got worse. The interpersonal kind of like antagonisms and weird paranoias, mental illness, drug-addled kind of like psychological kind of meltdowns, that stuff just continued unabated. But I don't know, I think the pandemic was good for some people and bad for other people. I think it was really bad for musicians. But I don't think I'm really a musician, you know what I mean? I'm more of a kind of performance artist / lyric whore. You know what I mean? My first language was always visual art and language itself. Like, it wasn't music, you know? So I kind of just happened to wind up doing that for a living, you know, incidentally.
But does that harken back then to your childhood as well? Because I read something where you were talking about the pandemic and the lockdowns, where it felt like you could, for the first time, enjoy being creative like you did when you were younger.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I was like, I think like a lot of people in my line of work, frontmen and, you know, kind of, they're really just kind of like closet like nerds, you know, like I think that's often the case, you know, and it's kind of exactly the case with me, where when I was a teenager, I was just uber shy, just geek, you know, like I was really kind of, I didn't have any friends, I was a bit bullied, and I spent a lot of time on my own. I didn't go out, I didn't do any drugs, and that was kind of my natural, basically who I was, you know. And when the pandemic came around, it was kind of like that, you know. There was nowhere to go, I had no friends, and there was nothing, you know, nothing was moving, there was nothing to chase, there was nobody to compete with. It was just like silence for endless silence, you know. And it was just like books and studying, and I really loved that, you know. It was like bits of my brain that I'd not used in nearly 20 years were sort of like coming back to life, you know. And yeah, I found myself really at home and able to kind of therapize myself a little bit with language, you know, like order the last 10 years of just chaos, you know, into something that was at least funny to read.
Was there then a particular writer or a particular book that you fell into that had a lasting effect on you?
During that period?
During the pandemic kind of period?
I mean, there was loads of things, you know, like a friend of mine's book, Rob Doyle, he wrote a book called Threshold, and I read that right at the beginning. And the minute I finished it, like, I mean, working with Adele Stripe on the book, she introduced me to all these like other authors that she knows, you know. So there were authors they weren't dead French guys or whatever, you know, they were real people that you could communicate with. And I read his book, and it was really kind of like it was a cross section of like miserabilist kind of philosophy, you know. It was a book that led on to 15 other books. So it created this kind of like tree of learning throughout the pandemic, you know. But the minute I finished that, I messaged this guy, and this Rob Doyle guy, and we've since become like, I guess, really, really close friends, you know. So that was a big influence on me, you know.
What is your writing philosophy then?
I think when I went into music, I went into it with a kind of like, even though like I'm saying it wasn't my first language, I still went at it like this kind of chip on my shoulder, fuck everybody, you know what I mean? Like, we're the shit and all that kind of like bullshit, you know? And now that I'm a bit older, I'm thinking the opposite, you know what I mean? Like, I don't really know anything, and I'm just gonna try and be kind of humble about this gig, because it's like, it's the people I know and like I've gotten to kind of acquainted with or whatever, they're so far ahead in their reading and their studying and everything like that, you know. I just like to kind of like a chance to sort of sniff around the table a little bit, you know, and see what's going on. But yeah, basically not to be an arrogant prick.
I think that's a good goal for any writer.
Yeah.
What I find interesting then is you mentioned at the core you don't consider yourself a musician, you're more of a writer, visual, creative. Whenever you start a process of making a new album then, how does that work for you? How do you navigate those initial kind of attempts at creating a new album?
Well, usually with our lot, and obviously the lineup has changed and people come and people go, and they come back and then they go again. And they come back and then they go again. But usually, like, I will maybe write like a small handful of songs a year, like a couple of naturally occurring songs that I think are kind of quite good per year. Like, I'm not sitting around like investigating, you know, if you get my drift, you know what I mean? But usually there'll be a kind of pool of other ideas. You know, like my brother will have a few, the guitarist will have a few, and then you'll have like 15 ideas, you know. And the lyrical side of things, that's something I can just sort of do on cue, you know. So I kind of try and harvest ideas from other people and then like finish the writing on those ideas, you know, and make it into kind of Fat Whites through the lyrical kind of side of it. That's kind of what I see myself as doing there, you know. But then you get into swades early on with an album where you're just throwing shit at the wall, you know, where you're taking a load of like weird hallucinogenic drugs and playing like, you know, the same synth line or bass part or over and over, just to find one or two little nuggets, you know. And you kind of harvest ideas for a period, I guess, you know.
Is it an arduous process for you?
I have found every Fat Whites album to be just a complete fucking oblivion of pain and suffering and anxiety and dread, and I've found them just always hideous things to have to make. And this one was, I'd say this one was in good running for the worst in terms of.
How come?
Just the interpersonal stuff was really horrible, and I don't know, I guess you just start to grow apart, you know, but you're still doing this thing because it was a good, like that Neil Young line, you know, it's easy to get buried in the past when you're trying to make a good thing last. I like that. It felt like that a lot of the time, you know.
Is it difficult to, because now the album is done, is it difficult to enjoy it then once it's done?
I think there's a kind of sweet spot when you finish an album, you know, where you finish it and then you're like, you can indulge the fantasy of like, it's this thing, you're listening to it, it's new, you finished it, you've got a track listing, you know, and you can indulge it for, there's about a 2-week sweet spot, and then you don't want to listen to it again until you get like the mix, you know, and then, you know, a month or two later you get the mix, and then you're like, you know, everything sounds kind of like polished. Everything sounds like HD, you know, everything's kind of like new, you know? And then beyond that, you can only really enjoy it if you're kind of like on drugs or something, you know? Like if you want to kind of enjoy that album again that you know so well that it's kind of, you have to smoke a bit of dope and walk down the street or something, and you can still derive some pleasure from it, yeah.
That's good to hear. And I suppose then once you start performing the songs live, that's a whole different animal as well.
That's a completely different thing. Yeah. That's like a lot of the time you'll get into the rehearsal space and these songs that you really love on the record suddenly just don't make any sense in the rehearsal room. And it's like, okay, fuck, like we don't have like 32 tracks, you know what I mean? Like we can't, there's like 6 or 7 of us, you know what I mean? We don't have, and you don't want to do everything on backing tracks. So you're in this kind of thing where you have to renegotiate these things. And that's often been the case, even with like Whitest Boy on the Beach. I remember we were all trying to get that, like desperately get it together before Glastonbury. And it was like, fuck man, is this just like, it's just not very good or something, you know what I mean? But eventually you find a way of making it work live, I guess. Or we did before, you know?
Let's delve into a couple of songs a little bit more deeply. Is there one specifically that stands out for you lyrically? Or otherwise, I'll pick one.
From this collection of songs?
Yes.
I guess the Today You Become Man thing stands out lyrically because it's just a short story.
What made you, well, that's kind of why I asked about it earlier, is what made you then write about it? What made you decide to write about kind of that element of your culture, that kind of...
I wrote about that immediately after reading a book by a guy called David Keenan called This Is Memorial Device. You ever hear of that?
No.
It's about this fictional post-punk scene in Scotland, you know, by this Scottish writer. It's one of the best music books you can read. Like, I couldn't recommend it enough, you know. It really is this amazing lyrical tangential thing, but it's still rooted in a very real kind of place, you know. You can still touch and feel and taste the whole world that he's carving out, you know. But it's all in that kind of Scottish vernacular, and my big brother was always kind of, you know, it's my big brother's circumcision, but I've heard the story from him a lot, but his vernacular, his register is more Scottish than mine. He sounds more like a Scotsman, and somehow reading that book and the style with which it was written, the kind of free-flowing kind of... I finished it, and within 10 minutes had written that bit about the circumcision, you know? It gave me a little key into my brother's kind of voice somehow. But it was really, really just a spur-of-the-moment kind of thing.
What were his thoughts on the song?
I think, you know, he was kind of, he would tell that story himself between like 3 and 5 in the morning when you're getting fucked up, you know, and in a really comic kind of a way. It was always a joke, you know, but we all heard this story, multiple different versions of this story, you know, a lot, you know. So I think he found it funny. I think he was quietly proud, you know. I haven't played it to my dad yet, though.
Okay. Are you hesitant?
No, I just think it's funny if he hears it with everyone else. I got enough problems. I don't need that guy on my back as well.
Makes sense. One song that I think really stood out for me was Feed the Horse for some reason. What was the starting point for that song?
That was my little brother's song, like, okay. You know, and I think he was... he's always been obsessed with this thing of songs that move really fast and really slow at the same time. That was his thing, you know. So, you know, that's his whole philosophy. But he was a junkie for a while, for a few years back in the day, you know. And I guess that's just his kind of like heroin song. Okay. You know.
Because that's I wrote down On the Edge next to it. This kind of feels like it's on the edge of perhaps what you say, kind of the going fast and going slow.
Yeah, which is kind of smack, I guess, in a way. You know?
But I don't know if this is, but having gone through what the band has gone through and then seeing your brother go through that, are you surprised that the band is where it is now?
Where's that?
Well, it's still alive.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. I mean, of course, it's changed shape and size and all the rest of it. But I don't know. I have a kind of like chronic fear of like job office and like menial employment, you know. And that was kind of what gave it its drive in the first place. Was like fear of job office. You know, and that never quite left. So even though things got really fucked up and dark and like, fuck man, this is intolerable, you know, it was like, yeah, but you don't want to risk winding up where you were before, you know. At least this is your mess, you know, like not somebody else's.
But is it difficult amongst, and you mentioned kind of the inner turmoil of the band over the years as well, is it difficult to find the motivation and drive to keep going?
It certainly was with this one, because there was so many so much falling out with each other. It was like fatigue, you know, and it was hard. And we were in such a good position with the last record.
Right.
We had like a sold out tour of Asia and China, you know, and Australia and stuff. And we were all going to go to Algeria to make a kind of like jihadi Graceland in the mountains there, where there'd be no heroin, there'd be no cocaine, you know. And the pandemic just wiped everything away, you know. And then it made life difficult, and it kind of separated everybody, but we were still kind of plugging on, you know. But yeah, it was a bit of a blow for us, you know. We lost all of our money, like booking a tour around Asia, you know, like visas and flights for like 9 people. It's just
right. And then the whole world stops, and there's no money coming in and everything, right?
Yeah, we were just fucked. Yeah.
How should I phrase this? Once this album was done, what kind of went through your mind? Was it kind of a sense of accomplishment then?
Yeah, and just relief. Yeah, a lot of relief that it actually, because a lot of the time it was like, was this even going to happen, you know? So it's a relief. Because
has your intention with the music changed then over time?
Just survival at that point with this one. It was just survival, you know?
Okay.
Just like, what are we going to do, you know?
With that in mind, then, for instance, a song like Visions of Pain, what does that signify to you?
I wanted to do something, look, when Saul left the band, I wanted to do something that was like more lyrical, you know? Because that was always my thing. That was always the bit of it that meant the most to me. That was always the bit in like music, folk and rock and roll that I was like, okay, I'm not like the best player, I'm never going to be the best player, but I always was kind of like into the lyrical side of stuff, you know what I mean? I always thought everybody else wrote, not that I write especially great lyrics, but I always thought everybody else wrote especially awful lyrics, you know? I thought if there was one way to kind of creep in to the game, then that was my way in, you know? And I think I've always kind of thought I could do more, and I just wanted to kind of to hit that nail on the head finally with this record a little bit, you know?
Have there been, because you mentioned Neil Young just now, and I believe Leonard Cohen is somebody you quite enjoy his work. Have there been lyricists or people that you've looked into or look up to in terms of lyric writing?
I think my favorite lyricist of like recent times was gotta be like Dave Berman, you know, like and the Silver Jews, and especially that album he released just before Topping Himself, you know, The Purple Mountains. I just thought that was like sublime on so many levels, you know. That guy's kind of like way up there for me.
Is that then and I've asked musicians this before, like there's probably an ideal picture in your mind of what the perfect song would be, or a perfect lyric or a perfect line. Is that then what you try to approximate?
I think you just try and incorporate some of that into whatever it is you're doing, you know? I think with this, it's still Fat Whites, where it's kind of like, it's this weird, angular kind of like, some of it's kind of post-punky, some of it's kind of like droney, some of it's kind of like just free-formy kind of stuff, you know? So you're just kind of, my job is to just kind of color these things in with language, you know, and just find the right tone that balances other people's ideas out, you know? I've spent a lot of time finishing other people's ideas. But in terms of like what I would like aspire to, you know, I think it's those incredibly kind of dense, acrobatic kind of knuckles of like lyric, you know, efficiency basically.
Okay, conciseness and direction.
Just like making a lot happen with a very little, you know what I mean, is the thing I kind of admire the most. Just a fucking great couplet at the end of the day, you know.
Fair enough. Final question, then. The notion forgiveness is yours, and then you kind of talked about it as looking at life as the realization that it's not ever going to get easier in a sense.
Yeah.
How did you arrive at that thought, and how has that inspired the album?
I think you're kind of in that, you're in between youth and middle age, you know. You're in your mid-30s and you realize that it's a loop, you know. Everything's on this kind of like loop. And in some sense, that's really kind of horrible and terrifying and demeaning even, you know. And then on another side of that is it's kind of like, I don't know, you just kind of accept that, you know. And it's kind of all right, you know. It's like, okay, well, here we are, you know what I mean? Your skin gets a little bit thicker and I guess you know yourself a little bit better, you know, your shortcomings or whatever. You learn to kind of like wear your shortcomings with a little bit more kind of grace, I guess, or something like that, you know? Something like that.
Lias, may I thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.